To now introduce our speaker. I'd like to thank Ben Sopranzetti for joining us today. Ben is a Rutgers Business School Professor of Finance and Economics and the Department Vice Chair. With more than 25 years of international experience, he is an expert in the area of business valuation, investment banking, financial strategy, and financial negotiations. Widely respected as a master teacher, Ben has an outstanding reputation for designing and delivering innovative programs for financial institutions and corporate clients. He is particularly well regarded for his cutting-edge work on valuation, mergers and acquisitions, cross-cultural negotiations, and high-level executive training. Ben teaches in several of the Rutgers mini MBA programs, where he receives outstanding participant evaluations, just as he does from students throughout Rutgers Business School degree programs. Ben, please take it from here.
Right. Hello, everybody, and welcome. I am Ben Sopranzetti, and as Margaret so very nicely introduced me, I'm from the Department of Finance and Economics, and I've got a pretty deep background in negotiations, especially financial transactions and negotiations of acquisitions in particular. Today's class is going to be a lot of fun. It's short, it's tight, got 45 minutes of content, and then I'm going to open it up for questions. So there are two fantastic books that I recommend for those of you that are interested or whose interest is piqued by this presentation. And the first is kind of the foundation upon which this whole deck is built. It's called Negotiation Genius: How to Overcome Obstacles and Achieve Brilliant Results at the Bargaining Table and Beyond. It's by two brilliant fellows, Deepak Malhotra and Max Bazerman. I was teaching executive MBA class in Singapore. And I bought the book in Newark Airport, and I was flying from Newark to Narita Airport in Japan. So I had that, like 12, 13-hour block of time. It's a little paperback book. And I just devoured this book. And I was so fired up as I was reading it. I'm like, you know what? I'm going to include this in my financial strategy class in Singapore. So the remaining trip from Tokyo to Singapore, I started building this deck. And I ended up with something that was really kind of cool. So that's a terrific book. It's a paperback book. It's like 6 by 9 inches. It's small. It's relatively inexpensive, and thumbs way up. Okay. The other book is a tome, and it's really an academic textbook kind of tome. But if you're interested in a deep dive into the psychology of negotiation, then the book by Lewicki, Barry, and Saunders is really terrific. You may want to get your hands on it, but that's not an easy read. That's really like an MBA course in negotiations, and especially maybe even somebody that was really specializing, like a specialty concentration in negotiations. But again, thumbs way up for those of you that are interested in taking a deep dive. Now, as we get into this deck, there's two types of negotiation, and I've got a slide on it coming up. One is integrative, one is distributive, but both of them are bilateral. Okay, bilateral means that both people are going to be communicating in the negotiation. Everybody has to get what they need. Remember that, not what they want. What they need. If everyone can get what they need, we're going to be able to conclude this negotiation. Now, figuring out what you need is relatively easy. Figuring out what they need is relatively difficult, especially if it's a distributive negotiation and they're keeping their cards close to their chest. Right? You need to learn how to be investigative and figure out why it is they're asking for that which they're asking, and kind of what is their bottom line. So remember, negotiations are bilateral. Now, as I mentioned, there's two types of negotiations. There's distributive negotiation and there's integrative negotiations. Today's class is going to be based on distributive negotiation. With distributive negotiations, there's a fixed pie. Folks, there's only so much stuff. And you and I are negotiating on how much of that pie comes to me. Now, there's only so much pie. It's a zero-sum game. So whatever I claim comes out of your piece of the pie. In this type of negotiation, you and I are adversaries, okay? Now, our relationship doesn't have to be adversarial, but the outcome decidedly is adversarial. The more that I claim, the less that you have. So in this type of negotiation, information is key, and your best to hold your cards relatively close to their chest. Like the last thing you want to tell a car dealer, so you've got a new car, right, that you're really interested in. The last thing you want to do is tell them that you've been looking for this car in this color with interior for 3 months. Nobody has it. You can't believe you found it. Okay, that's a disaster. That car salesman is not going to be highly motivated to move on that price if they think that you really want it. They're going to be more resistant. I mean, unless they're desperate to sell. Now, that's very different than integrative negotiation. Right now, with integrative negotiation, the idea is you got to make the pie bigger. Right. So now here, trust is key. For example, if I were negotiating with Margaret, who's my colleague and who's also my friend, okay, I wouldn't feel the need for an adversarial style zero-sum game. What I would do is I would put my cards on the table in front of Margaret. She would put her cards on the table in front of me because we trust each other. And we then together would see, are there give and takes that places where I could yield that's painless to me, that adds a lot of value to her, and are there places that she could yield that could add a lot of value to me, and then together with our synergies, and we can make that pie bigger. Okay, that's not what this section's about. This is all about distributive negotiation, kind of like you're negotiating a salary increase, or you're going to be negotiating a car purchase, or you're going to be negotiating whatever it is that you're going to be negotiating where there's a zero-sum game. Okay, so the first question you have to ask in a distributive negotiation, and folks, I need you to seriously ask this question. You're sitting at the negotiating table, and I want you to look around that room, and I want you to ask this question of yourself: who's the sucker? Because now, sucker means the person that has the least information, right? The one that has the least information in a negotiation is always the sucker. Okay, so you got to ask, because if you don't know who the sucker is, guess what? That sucker's you. Okay, now if you're the sucker in a negotiation, that means you have to be very careful. Your information is inferior to the person that's not a sucker. For example, every time you buy a used car, you're the sucker in that transaction. Okay, the seller unequivocally knows more than you do about the details of that car. And it's up to you to ferret out the information to mitigate that asymmetry in information between you and the seller. For example, you've got, let's say, 2 BMW 328s, right? Nice car, a fun car, and you're thinking about buying one that's 3 years old, that has about 27,000 miles on it. And they're plentiful in the market. There's a lot of lease returns, okay? Now, those cars are plentiful in that $25,000 price range. So you have 2 cars, and say you wanted silver with a black interior, and they look identical. No dings, no nothing. They look fantastic. They're both advertised for $25,000. And the thing is, folks, they may not both be worth $25,000 because one of them may have 25,000 miles driven on the highway at 60, 65,000 miles an hour where the engine is not laboring. And the other one may have been driven at the track for 20 of those 25,000 miles. And that engine is hammered, okay? And the transmission is hammered. You don't know which car that is. In that type of situation, you're the sucker. You keep your information close to your chest and you wisely ask questions to try to mitigate that uncertainty. Second, most things are negotiable. Now, here in America, we don't have, and Canada too, we don't have a culture of negotiation. We feel awkward to negotiate prices if it somehow diminishes us. But that's not the case at all in the rest of the world. I mean, I've spent a lot of time in China. I've even negotiated cab fare in China. Everything is negotiable, provided you have the decision maker at the table. Because if you're negotiating with the minion doesn't have the authority to cut as deep as you may want to cut. For example, if you're buying a new car and you're able to consummate that transaction with the salesperson, okay, realize the salesperson is an agent working on behalf of the boss, who's the sales manager, okay? If the deal that you work out is able to be consummated with the salesperson, it means you didn't cut deep enough, okay? You could have probably gotten a better deal. When the sales manager has to come over, then you know you made a cut that's deep enough. You got the decision maker involved, and now only she can make that concession. I'll give you an example. Usually at the end of the year, I take my students out in my advanced corporate finance class, and there's a nice little pizzeria near Rutgers called Stuff Your Face, and they're famous for strombolis, which is kind of an inside-out pizza. But usually my class is on a Wednesday night, which is a dead night at Rutgers. So Tuesday and Thursday night are the party nights. When is the dead night? So I give this cool final case, and at the end, I take my kids to Stuff Your Face. And so I negotiate, I meet with the manager of Stuff Your Face. Look, I'm going to be bringing 45 kids over here. On Wednesday night, I'm going to be buying pizza. I'm going to take out the whole top floor. Remember, that place is crickets. You can literally hear crickets on there on a Wednesday night, okay? The whole top floor, look, I'm probably going to spend $600 or $700 on pizza. Okay, my students are probably going to hit the bar. I can't buy alcohol, but they're probably going to want to buy stuff. You're probably going to end up with a $1,200 to $1,500 tab here by the end of the night when you would have had a dead night. Okay, so do you think you could throw in like 10 pitchers of soda for free? And what do you think the manager says? Of course, she said yes. Of course she said yes, but do you realize those pitchers are $10 a piece? I just saved $100 simply by asking, okay? And you justify the request. So remember, negotiate with the decision maker. Had I asked a waiter or waitress for that kind of deal, they probably would have been too embarrassed to even bring it to the boss. And I would not have gotten that deal. Don't be afraid to negotiate. Okay, and this is not a class on compensation. Maybe this is something I could do for Margaret later on. But you should expect to negotiate. And realize, gang, if someone doesn't say no, it's not a negotiation. Expect them to say no, right? And the answer to no is why. Right? Understand the reason why they're saying no. And then let's phrase it in a way or bring more information or come back on another date. Okay, we'll talk more about that later. I love this example. And in fact, this is the example I hooted, literally I hooted like an owl when I read this on the plane. And it really was the motivation for me to start this class. So it's 1912, and this is an example of how you can create value out of nothing in a negotiation. Now, for those of you that grew up in America and studied American history, you will recognize this very famous American president, who's Theodore Roosevelt. For those of you that do not recognize this president, he's a very well-respected American president. He's extremely famous. There were two Roosevelts, Franklin and Teddy. So it was 1912, and he was campaigning very hard on the presidential trail. Realize back then, there were no telephones, there was no fax. You had trains. Okay, the radio wasn't even developed yet. There was no radio. There wasn't even a banking system back then. The Federal Reserve wasn't created until much, much later in the 30s. So President-to-be Roosevelt was in New York and was about to embark on a cross-country sojourn. Okay, and they would make campaign stops, and they would have a brochure, and this brochure would have their campaign speech. It'd have a picture of the candidate. It would have a kind of what is their political position. And okay, so there's 3 million copies of this in New York on the train, ready to go. And the campaign manager realizes, now you may not be able to see this in the webinar, but there's a little bit of white text down here that's blurry. And what that text says is copyright Moffett Studios, Chicago. Folks, they never asked the photographer for permission to use the photo. This is a clear copyright violation. And back then, the remuneration for such a violation is $1 per picture. There's 3 million pictures. You're talking, that's like 60 million bucks right now. Okay, so you've got this potential liability of 3 million bucks. The alternatives, okay, well, we can always reprint the brochures. The problem is this is 1912. There's no high-speed printing. I mean, how long is it going to take them to print 3 million of these things? Several weeks. There's somebody cranking a machine, right? So it's going to take several weeks. That's off the table. So the alternative is that they're going to have to find a way to negotiate a better deal with Mr. Moffat. And they've done some research and they found out that Mr. Moffat's approaching retirement and has a money-focused mindset. This is kind of a dangerous situation for us, okay? So how does Roosevelt's campaign manager handle this? And the way in that he handles it is brilliant, okay? He sends a telegram to the photographer. The telegram says, planning to distribute 3 million copies of campaign speech with photographs. Stop. Excellent publicity opportunity for photographers. Stop. How much are you willing to pay us to use your photographs? Please respond immediately. Okay? To which Mr. Moffat responds, we've never done this before, but under the circumstances, we'd be pleased to offer you $250. Folks, are you serious? How did this guy turn a $3 million liability into a $250 gain? Because he understood what having that photograph in this presidential brochure tied to a popular candidate would do for Mr. Moffat's business. Photographers would kill for this chance. And in fact, that one photograph completely turned around the future of Moffat Studios in Chicago. Brilliant. I want to teach you how to claim value in negotiation. And in the next half hour, I'm going to do my best to do so. Okay, so we start with assessing our best alternative to negotiated agreement. That is called BATNA, best alternative to negotiated agreement. All power in a distributive negotiation comes from this concept of BATNA. BATNA is the reality of what you face if the negotiation ends in no deal. Okay, this is your plan B. BATNA is your plan B. What happens? What is the worst case scenario that will happen? Now, understanding your BATNA helps you to assess your lower bound, which is your reservation price. The stronger your BATNA, the less you have to budge on price, okay? Now, BATNA is not what you think is fair. It's not what you originally paid. It's not what you want. It's not what you hope. It is the cold, sober reality of what you face if you reach no deal. And I need you to really think about this. Okay, so for example, about a week ago, I was contacted by a university in California for a dean's position. Okay, and not that I particularly wanted it. I'm lucky I had my family here. I prefer to stay here. Okay, but I got to tell you, it was a pretty exciting offer, and it was a good offer in a great location, great school. Maybe later in my life, I might have been interested. And they put a number in front of me that was a very attractive number. The thing is, I like my job. I'm happy to be here. I have a very strong alternative. Yet what they'd have to pay me to get me to move is really high, much more than what they were willing to pay. And I don't care if they can't pay it. I'll just turn it down. But you want me? You've got to meet my number. And if you don't meet my number, I don't care, because I like my job. In fact, I love my job. Okay, if you haven't noticed. I really like this job and the people with whom I work, and I'm lucky to have my parents. I get to see them. It's fantastic. So I have a very strong BATNA in that situation. So assess your BATNA. All power in a distributed negotiation comes from BATNA. Now, your actual BATNA and your perception of my BATNA. There's two pieces here, okay? There's how strong my plan B really is, and there's two pieces, because I'm going to try to influence you into thinking my plan B is stronger than what it actually is, because you're going to act on your perceptions. Okay. Now, if I can influence you into thinking that my BATNA is higher than what it is, and that impacts your perception, fantastic, I win. Okay, so there's four places: my actual BATNA, my opponent's actual BATNA, my opponent's perception of my BATNA, and my perception of my opponent's BATNA. These are things you need to try to assess. If you know their BATNA, you can hammer them in the negotiation, okay? If you know what they're willing to pay and why they're willing to pay that, if they desperately need it or they have a short time frame, they've got to close this thing, it's party time in a negotiation. So once we know our BATNA friends, this helps us calculate our reservation value. Now realize, reservation value may not just be price. It can be multi-dimensional. Think about your compensation package, right? Your compensation is not just about money. Now, when you're younger, say you're 21 and you're just starting, salary tends to be the most important consideration. But as you get older, okay, salary is certainly important. You have to make enough, but there are other things that are important. Like, for example, do you get sick days? How much vacation time do you get? Do they have college credit remuneration? Will they pay for your graduate degree? Will they pay for your kids? Will they allow you to work from home? Is there a travel allowance? These are things that are all blurry, okay, but that add a lot of value to me. Like that school in California put a lump of money in front of me that seriously turned my head. It's like, wow, that's a lot of dough, but it's not enough. What's more than you make at Rutgers? I understand, but I get to see my parents at Rutgers. I have a band here, a family, friends. I like it here. I grew up here. So I walked away. So remember, right, this may be a multi-dimensional reservation value, but for the purposes of the rest of today's class, let's keep it as price, okay? You're gonna find a price at which you're gonna walk away. Let's talk about a car, okay? Price at which you walk away. Now, the mistake that people make is they focus on their own BATNA and they don't realize it's a bilateral negotiation. If the other side doesn't get what they need, they're gonna haul, they're gonna walk and bail on this thing. You've got to try to figure out what's their reservation value. Has that car been sitting on the lot for 4 or 5 months, 6 months, 7 months? Is it getting near the end of the month and you know that that dealership has been dry? In which case they may be desperate to move this car. They may have a relatively low reservation value. You could possibly get a really great deal on this thing. Okay, but if this is a hot model that just came out and you're showing up at the beginning of the month, their reservation value may not be as flexible. Okay, they may want to stick to their guns in the hope that they'll be able to sell this at the highest price. Okay, so assess the other party's BATNA so you can get the zone. Now you know their walkaway point, you know your walkaway point, and everything in between is up for grabs. Okay. Your task is not just to get the deal done. Your task is to claim as much value for your side as possible. It is a distributive negotiation. You're fighting over the zone. That's what you're fighting about. Okay, here's the zone. Here's the price at which she'll sell. Here's the price at which I want to buy. I want to get her as close to my price as possible. She wants to get me as close as her price as possible. And everything outside of the zone is not going to fly. So many people ask, hey, Dr. Ben, should I make the first offer? And there are many executives that say don't, okay? Many executives say never make the first offer. But the thing is, gang, if you make the first offer, you take control of the negotiation. So the answer to this question is that it depends. And what it depends on is whether or not you know what their BATNA is. Okay, whoever has more information, the more information you have, if you know your adversary's true reservation value, anchor aggressively. Like if you make the mistake of telling that car salesman that you've been desperately looking for this car in this color for so much time, they're going to anchor at a price that's really high. And they're going to try to move you to their anchor. Whereas if you walk into that dealership and you've done your homework and you've got 5 quotes, in fact, that's not how I buy a new car anyway. I mean, you should never negotiate the price of a new car. A new car, you should call the dealership, say you want to talk to the internet sales professional, the manager, in fact, get that individual on the line and say, look, I have a quote from dealership blah for this car in this color for this price. If you can give me that price and get me out of there in an hour, I'll buy that car today. Done. You open because you know what it's worth because you have a competing price right here. You know what someone will sell that car for. And if that dealer says anything other than yes, say thank you, hang up the phone and call the other person. But I guarantee you, if it's a fair offer, that dealer will call you back. But if you don't know what it's worth. If it's a used car, okay, then defer the opening bid until you have more information. You may be surprised. That individual may reveal something in the price. For example, we had that example about the two BMWs, and one of the BMWs was driven in the highway, the other one was driven at the track, okay? One may be listed at 25, the other may be listed at 21. Now, you may think, oh, that's a bargain, let's get the one for 21. Then you gotta stop for a minute, okay? Why is that thing listed for 21? How come? Now, maybe it really is a value. And if it is, terrific, ferret it out, buy the $21,000 car. But it may be that that car has some serious problems with it. And the price may reflect that, okay? So bear that in mind. Whether you make the first offer depends on the amount of information you have. And that first offer is called an anchor, okay? And that anchor focuses the other person's attention and sends a signal about your Batna. And people will gravitate to that. Now, when I consult, I do not negotiate the price of my consulting. Here's the price. That's it. You take it or leave it. Because I don't need the money. What I need is my free time. And I don't have a lot of free time. So if I'm going to be doing consulting work, then you got to pay me what I'm worth. And if you can't afford it or you want to negotiate it, then I'm not the right person for you. Go hire somebody else. And I don't feel bad about it at all. Okay, so this is very useful when the other party is really not certain about what's the fair value of your services. I don't want to get into a deep discussion with a potential client if they're going to give me a hard time about what I'm going to charge them. I'd rather just pass. I'll give you an example of how the anchor really works. There's a place in Beijing called the Beijing Silk Market. Okay, the Beijing Silk Market, and it's 4 floors, it's a shopping mall. It's 4 floors of fake stuff. Everything in there is fake, from Hermes bags to Jimmy Choo shoes to Rolex watches to Hermes silk. It's all fake Olay. It's super fake, okay? So, but there are tour buses coming in because it's an iconic place in Beijing. Everybody wants to go shopping there, and they're all suckers. Everybody who walks in that door is a sucker to be preyed upon. So imagine, I'll do the typical American that walks into one of these booths and they're full of these lovely young, all the saleswomen are young and they're women. There's no men. Very rare that you find a man in a sales position at the Beijing Silk Market, maybe hiding in the back somewhere. But they all look like young college-age kids or maybe a little bit older, okay? Their English is perfect. And so you walk in, and this is about an anchor. I don't want you to lose track of where I'm going with this because of the story. So you walk in and you're looking at a tie, and remember, these are fake. You could get them at Kmart, okay? And how much is this tie? And the young woman doesn't even say the price to you. She puts it in a calculator and shows you, right? Same thing when you buy a car. The sales guy never tells you the price. He always writes it down. When you sit down to negotiate, he always writes it down. When you physically hand somebody something like that, it gains a gravitas that it otherwise wouldn't have, and it cements that anchor as being more serious. So she starts with 300, okay? Now, for a typical American, a 50% discount is great. A 60% discount is fantastic. And if you can get an 80% discount, pay 20% of list, you're killing it. Like, you're a genius if you can get it down. So the typical person says 20 to 30% is what I want to pay. So I want a 70 to 80% discount. 300, I want to get this for 60. If I can get this for 50 or 60, I'm done. This is great, okay? I'm a superstar. So she opens up at 300 and you're like, come on, 300 is ridiculous. Give me a better price. No, you give me price. I'm like, okay, 30. 30, no, this is a good price. This is good quality. No, you're insulting me. I'll give you a better price. She comes down to 200. The first drop is enormous, okay? She goes, you give me your price, 200? You go, no, come on, look, 35. 35, no, this is a good quality time. I'll give you a better price, 150. Actually, she's coming down 50, moving in the right direction. How about 40? 40 is not serious price. Give me a better price, 45. Notice she skipped. You let her skip, right? Mistake. 45. 45, this is a good tie. No, 120. 120. Look, lady, like, you're wasting my time. I want to spend 50 for this tie. 50. She says, give it to you for 90. 90. Look, my bottom line is 60. If you can't give me 60, I'm out of here. She goes, okay, what about 2 for 125? Now you're getting close to your 60, right? 2 for 125. You say 2 for 120, we have a deal. Okay, deal. 2 for 120. And you're like, yeah, I'm a negotiating genius. I rule the world. You call your partner, honey, I am so great. I rock this thing. I got it for 20% of the price. Yeah. And you're sitting there gloating, like you're sitting outside, basking in your own glory for being such a tremendous negotiator. And then my secretary in China walks in to get a fake tie for me. And she walks in and she picks the exact same tie as you do. And she's a tough woman, good negotiator. She walks in, grabs the same tie, and before the lady in the booth can open her mouth, my secretary says, I'll give you 6 renminbi for this tie. And your jaw drops. 6, that's 1/10 of what I paid. And she says, I know you're going to sell it to me for 8. But look, I want to buy 10 ties, and I'll make it easy for you, okay? I'm going to give you 100 renminbi for 10 ties. That's 10 renminbi a tie. We got a deal? The lady goes, we got a deal. Done. And you're horrified, okay? That anchor, she opened with 300. You made a reference, 20% of a number that was ridiculously high. Had she anchored with 100, she never would have ended up with 60. And not only did she end up with 60, she ended up with 2 ties sold at 60. Gang, the first time I went to the Beijing silk market in 2000, I got ripped off so badly that they actually felt bad afterwards and had mercy on me and gave me a scarf from my mother as a gift. That's how guilty they had for taking me to the cleaners. But I learned my lesson. Fool me once, shame on me. Right? Fool me twice, shame on me. So, okay, how do you respond to an initial offer? How do you respond to an anchor? First of all, don't dwell on it. Do not ask them to defend the anchor. Don't discuss it. The more you discuss it, the stronger it becomes. Don't push them to justify the anchor. Don't get angry. It's just a negotiation. If they lowball you, so what? You're going to counter. So what if it's a low ball? Ignore the low ball. Okay? Make a countered offer and propose moderation. Okay? always justify. I've done my research, and I'm thinking that blank is a much more reasonable place to start. I'm flexible and I'm willing to negotiate, but we've got to start from here. Do not dwell. Do not allow them to justify that anchor. The more you allow them to you're the one that justifies the anchor, not them. Okay? Now, it's important for you to separate information from influence. Influence is fluff. Influence is noise that exists to trick you into thinking they have a high Batna. Car salesman, for example, we had somebody look at that car this morning. They're going to be coming in tonight to make a deposit. How many times have you heard that? Everybody has heard that gobbledygook garbage from a sales guy. That's not real. Because if it were real, they would have already had a deposit. If you're interested in the car, they don't let you leave without making a deposit. Come on, that's just fluff. Okay? So separate influence from information. Kind of like if an employee says that they want a raise, it's one thing to say, I want a raise because Johnny over at Bank of America got one. It's quite another thing for them to say, look, I got a raise. I have a signed offer from somebody else. That's information. A signed offer, that's real. Their Batna has been changed. The other one is just noise. Okay? So what should be your first offer? Americans, listen to me. For some reason, and again, this is our culture, okay? Americans are uncomfortable with negotiation. They don't want to seem greedy. They don't want to seem like they're not flexible. Keep the entire zone in play. Make an offer that's justifiable, okay, but falls just outside the zone. You know the other side's not going to accept it, okay? But force them to negotiate in, because I'm going to teach you. Every concession that you make is an opportunity to claim value. If your first offer is already in the zone, you've already given up value. Anchor outside the zone. If you're willing to pay $41,000 for a car, okay, start with 38. Start with 39. Force them to negotiate. The dealer's not going to say just no, the heck with it. If they want to sell a car, they're going to come back with, listen, this car's 45. Okay, now you knew it was 45. You knew it was going to come back in 45, make them to 39. Make them work their way down into your price. Now, always provide a justification for your offer, friends. Okay? In most business negotiations, look, if you're negotiating with a street vendor in the Beijing silk market, who cares if you offend them? Who cares if you lowball them? You know how many people are that can sell you a tie? That relationship doesn't matter to you, okay? But in business negotiations, you don't want to lose credibility. So you don't want to anchor in a way that's really ridiculous. You can be aggressive, but you shouldn't be ridiculous. What's the most aggressive offer that I can justify? I'd like to propose X because, actually, I'd reverse it. Because of this, I'd like to propose X. But let me give you a word of warning. In disputes with a mediator, okay, mediators are not professional valuation experts. It could be a judge, it could be an accountant, it could be a lawyer, it could be somebody like that. So a person that has been designated as the mediator. And what mediation means is to find the median. And the median is the halfway point. How many times have you been in a mediation? Oh, I don't know, well, let's just split it down the middle. Well, if you're going into a mediation against a professional negotiator like me, you need to know that I'm going to anchor stupid high. I'm going to anchor incredibly high, knowing that that mediator is going to find the middle point. Okay? And my counterparty may be naive or ignorant of this. They're going to anchor normally. I'm going to anchor ridiculously, and the median is going to be in my client's favor. So be careful. In disputes with mediators, you should expect extreme demands, okay, from the other side, and don't be afraid to make extreme demands yourself. Don't about justifying it. Same thing with the street vendor. I mean, you know, if you go to a street vendor, you're in New York, a guy wants to sell you a bag for 20 bucks, offer him $5. $5. You'd be shocked at the price at which they'll sell these things. And who cares if they get angry? All right, who can just walk away, walk up to the next one. It's literally 10 feet away and buy the bag from that one. Okay. Now, I think it's important. I certainly don't want to leave this deck without considering the context of the relationship. It's very important. You know, the person with whom you are bargaining may perceive it to be ill-received. Arguing, you know, negotiating with your boss, be very, very careful how you anchor and how you place things. Like the way I would negotiate with a trusted friend like Margaret is very different than the way I would negotiate with a street vendor in Beijing. I don't want to ruin my relationship with Margaret, even if I have all the power in the negotiation. I'm not going to leverage it all. One, that she's my friend. Two, I want to do repeat business for her. Okay, so it's very important. Understand the needs and sensitivities of the relationship. Your goal is to strengthen the relationship. Listen, we're going to have repeat business. I need you to know I'm a serious negotiator. I have integrity. But listen, if I have a strong position, I'm going to use it, and you need to know that. But I'm not going to clobber you with it. I'm not going to, that'll rancor. That you don't want. Okay. Now, very often in a negotiation, I'm worried that the other side is lying to me. Or there's some uncertainty in the negotiation that's unresolved, and I still have to close the deal, but there's important pieces that are still missing. And the way you protect yourself from lies and uncertainty is to use a contingency contract. Now, the next slide will tell you what it is, and I'll kind of show you, but then I'll give you an example that'll really drive it home. It's the only way to protect yourself, okay? So the contingency contract is something in the negotiation that leaves certain part of the deal unresolved until the future uncertainty is resolved. And if they're lying, they'll resist the contract. Let me give you an example, okay? They resist the contract, it's a big red flag. So I was negotiating a hotel deal in Boracay in the Philippines. And it was a really nice property. We looked at an $89 million closing price. We would be happy to pay that closing price. It was sitting on it was on the market for about a year. I had a Chinese buyer. It was Iranian seller. It had been sitting on the market. It looked like a really good deal. I did my due diligence. It looked good. Everything came up like roses, except I'm super sensitive to mold. Okay, super sensitive to mold. And I was there for a 2-week deal. And man, I gotta tell you, gang, I was sick as a dog every time I went back to my room. Every time. And those of you that are allergic to mold, you know exactly what I'm talking about, right? You know it right away. You can't even breathe. I knew something was wrong. And so as part of the deal, I'm like, listen, guys, has this property been tested for mold? Yes, it has. Well, can I see the contract? Well, we don't have it here. Can I see the test? Oh, we don't have it. This property's got to get test for mold. Yeah, but it really doesn't have any mold on, of course. I didn't believe him, right? And my client needed to close the deal by Sunday. And here it's Friday. I'm not going to be able to get this thing tested for mold by Sunday. And I want to close the deal because my client wants the property before he goes back to China. So here is what I did. Okay. I'm like, we're going to offer you this deal with a contingency contract. We're going to offer you $81 million in cash, and we're going to put $8 million in escrow with Standard Chartered Bank. And that $8 million will be released if the mold test comes back negative. Now, why wouldn't the owner of the hotel say yes? If it truly didn't have mold, of course you would say yes. This property's been on the market for a year, for crying out loud. They're motivated. If they don't say yes, they're lying to me. Okay? And this is a great way to catch somebody who's lying. If they balk on that contingency contract, it's a big red flag that something is wrong. And guess what, gang? They balked. I knew there was mold in those walls. And it's one of the few ways to protect yourself with a contingency contract. Okay? Now, we have a few minutes left, and I want to talk to you about some effective haggling strategies before we run out of time. Okay? Be very comfortable with silence. Silence in the West, in the US, Canada, in the West, is perceived as disapproval. If somebody talks to you and if you ask a question and they respond with complete silence, if you say something, they respond with silence, people become very uncomfortable and they start to fill the void with chatter. Okay? Once you've made your offer, keep your mouth shut. Let them consider it. Big difference in China. In China, they're not going to respond right away. There will be silence. And that silence is showing you that what you've said to them is important. And they're giving it the due consideration that it deserves. So if somebody makes an offer, rather than responding negatively right away, simply wait it out. Respond with silence. Very quickly, the other side will begin to moderate their offer, especially a car deal. Okay, salesman put up $45,000. Just look at him. Just look at him. I guarantee you they're going to lower the price. Do not make unilateral concessions. Negotiations are bilateral. Be flexible and make concessions. But gang, you have to demand reciprocity. It's two ways. You have to demand reciprocity. In other words, when you make a concession, phrase it in a quid pro quo way. In a quid pro quo way. If you do this, I think I can do that. Okay, Ben, can you do this? Can you do this negotiation thing on whatever day at this price? And I'm kind of booked that day. I'm like, Margaret, if you could move it to this session, I think I can do it because I'm just not, right? Contingent concession. If you do, phrase